Okay. So I've looked through the last meeting. I think uh, largely the group was in favor of developing a registration and reporting program. The agency said that we would go back and put together our recommendations as a first cut of what we were thinking for a program, taking a shot at a threshold and, different reporting requirements and how those could potentially be met. So for the threshold question, we're proposing those that use greater than or equal to 5,000 gallons per day would register their water withdrawal. And this is, really based on looking a bit at some of our small watershed streams our streams with small watersheds and the miles of stream that we have under 2 square miles. And trying to cast basically a wide net to understand what use is out there. This isn't what we're, if there was a permitting program, this isn't what we're locking in for a permitting threshold, but just trying to collect the data of the water use that's currently out there. And those withdrawals under 5,000 gallons per day would be exempt from the registration program. For the reporting requirements, we're saying that between 5,000 gallons per day and a little less than 50,000 gallons per day, they could estimate their water withdrawal use, based on probably pump capacity and the amount of hours that it was run, just to get a sense of that. And those withdrawals that were greater than 50,000 would require metering with the actual amount of water that they were withdrawing. We also are recommending to allow exemptions in the reporting for uses where there's already a required reporting authority, so such as snowmaking, which reports under the snowmaking rules, and drinking water, which has their own set of reporting requirements. No, I guess the sense being there's no need to report these twice, and the agency will have the data from those uses that it can incorporate into its overall data set of the water use. And then, we would adopt a guidance and implementation of the registration program, whether it be, I think ideally we'd want some online database that we could upload and have available for users to input. And I think that's what largely we saw from that was successful in New Hampshire and Minnesota's programs. So those are our initial thoughts that we came up with. We did discuss a couple alternative approaches, but we didn't make any concrete recommendations or conclusions because I think we wanted to keep it simple. And one thing being the threshold being simple, as a 5,000 gallons per day sort of threshold, or maybe it's average per day. But one thought that we had is, do we also include a trigger of average water use in a month? I think New Hampshire and I think Minnesota both had examples of that, where they had a daily use value, then a monthly use value. And whether we want to use that approach, I guess is a discussion point for the group. And the other alternative was whether we consider any exemptions of sectors for reporting and registration. But we, again, put that out there as a discussion point and not didn't make any conclusions to that fact. So maybe the begin the conversation, which would probably have the most, is around the threshold question. and what people's thoughts are on a threshold for the reporting aspect to be able to collect data. Yep, good, Jeff.
Jeff, just a question on that. Are you thinking that these gallon per day numbers would be maximum values or average values or something? Because like if you had, let's just say you were, as an example, watering crops, and one day you took a couple hundred gallons, another day you took 5,000 gallons, would it be that maximum day that would trigger you having to report, or is it going to be like an average, or how would you envision that?
Yeah, I was that question popped in my head when I was presenting that and I initially thought average, would use the average of 5,000 gallons per day on that, but I'm open to suggestions and what other thoughts are from the committee.
Okay.
If I could just ask a follow-up to that.
Yep.
Because Jeff, you mentioned, I think, in your introduction that you said something like, given the number of small, first order or small streams that could be affected by this, you cited that as potentially as a reason to use a lower threshold here of 5,000, I think.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And
that's just because there's more sensitive to water withdrawal in those smaller watersheds.
Right.
So
I think
here's
sorry, go ahead.
So if you can see my screen, I have the breakdown of the stream miles, and mostly, the under 2 square mile. Mostly I'm focusing on this range, I would say.
Yeah. No, it's a good observation. I mean, when you look at the distribution of stream sizes across our state, if you're familiar with them, this is by drainage areas, one way to break it down, but first and second order streams, which are the tributary streams, make up about 75% of our the total network, if you're to sum it up, So, and then looping back to Jeff Nelson's point, I guess, so it's like, what are we trying to get at in terms of significance of withdrawal with respect to the flowage of streams? If it's a instantaneous withdrawal rate, it could actually be meaningful to a small stream, or maximum, or is it a daily average, which you could have a lot of variability, including a lot of, so it deserves some thinking.
No, you make a good point on the maximum. If we're concerned with an instantaneous issue, then it would make sense to have it as the maximum per day, which may be easier to understand too for trying to make it the registration more simplistic, I guess, in nature.
Yeah. I don't know if you want me raising my hand. I have another question.
No, go ahead, Jeff.
Okay. Let's see. So, just sort of thinking about the framework here, obviously, this is ultimately going to become part of the report and the recommendations. And I think one of the things that I would recommend in this section on registration and reporting is what the recommendation would be as far as time frame for rolling this out, and what the recommendation would be as far as, for lack of a better word, publicity, meaning, how do people find out about the fact that they're supposed to do this? So I think those are points that, thinking big picture here, that this is part of our report that's going to the legislature. Those might be the kinds of questions that those folks might be asking. that we should be prepared, I think, in the report to have some kind of statement about.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, and we can include a recommendation on those two things, and I think I'd be open to the committee's recommendations on the publicity and how we alert the public of this, when, if it occurs, type thing. John and David, I don't know which one.
David, you want to go? When you go first? If you had your hand up, or I'm happy to.
Oh, you're on mute, David.
When this was under discussion, one of the things I had in my mind was the dam registration. It was newly implemented. There, was no track record of the agency having done anything like that, and yet they in fact did operate you guys really did operate an effective outreach program. So I don't know exactly what the steps were. I do know what I received, and I'm not a dam owner, but I do know what I received. And so maybe you could follow that as an outline towards an approach to doing that outreach and notifying people of the necessity to register.
Yeah, I can talk to the dam safety program. One thing that may be slightly different is, they did have an existing dam inventory with addresses of the owners for many of them, which they were able to kind of get the registration program kickstarted by sending them letters because they were contacts through the voluntary inspection program that the program been running for years. So, but I think that may be a good start. See how they reached out to some of the more gray dams across the state. John?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. This seems like a really good start. I'm a lawyer and I'm not a hydrologist. So I definitely am looking to Jeff and Evan and you, Jeff, and agency technical staff in order to decide how to craft the registration in terms of, I think, the regulatory policy that I think is appropriate is to cast, a wide net, like within reason. I think we want more information than less information, and so I mean, and I'll consult with our own experts, technical experts, as we go through drafting. I mean, I like the framework that you set up, but I think it's really important the technical decision we make. I myself, I'm just not an expert to say what those thresholds should be, but like I said, the principle is to cast a reasonably wide net so we get a sense of what's out there and what the impacts are. And I think just, this is not a technical issue. This is, how do we create a regulatory scheme issue? And that's on the exemptions. And I wouldn't even call, people are already reporting. I wouldn't even say they're exemptions. I mean, they're already reporting.
Right.
So it's not an exemption. It's, you just, you don't need to duplicate the request for information.
Right.
But I just strongly, and I strongly believe, and I think it's backed up by all the testimony that we received, that it makes no sense to have any exemptions from reporting because you need to get the full picture. And if you don't have the full picture, we really don't know what the impacts may be on our streams and rivers, and we won't be able to go to the next step and craft, a program to address those impacts. So I creating any holes in information doesn't make any sense to me. So.
Okay. Brian?
Thanks. I have a number of just questions. But I won't hog all the airtime. I think this question I have pairs nicely, John, with what you were just sharing about we need to understand where potential impacts are happening. My question is, and perhaps I think it is important to pair with this, not necessarily an alternative, but what additional flow monitoring or in-stream investigations is DEC going to do to is proposing or otherwise to understand if there are impacts happening from these withdrawals, right? The de minimis thresholds that's established in the procedure below which, you're predicted to not have an impact. I appreciate you probably need registration reporting before you can do that targeting, but demonstrating that there is an impact from that. I recall New Hampshire talking about all the watershed studies they did to try to establish flow rates and what you could permit or not. I'm wondering if that's part of the proposal DEC is considering, which is in-stream flow monitoring or understanding whether there is impairments, and then trying to tie that with whether it's climate-based variability or if the withdrawals themselves are causing any of those impacts. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I think those are good questions. I think largely right now we're in the dark with what to do next until we understand what the amount of water withdrawal is out there in terms of whether they're having effects or not. This is really just trying to gather that information, and then if there was potentially issues, we would have to determine what course of investigation we would need to undertake to determine there was an impact or wasn't an impact, or violating our water quality standards, etc. But I think largely we need to figure out what's going on out there in terms of water withdrawals before we make that decision.
I think some language too, if you don't have sufficient funding to do that, budgetary needs prospectively, I think are important to include, because just because there is a withdrawal and it may be substantive, depending on the section of the watershed, the time of year, and may or may not, have an impact. So just trying to raise that part of the equation. I absolutely appreciate the need to know where they're happening first and how much, but I think that's also another part that should be a part of this, in my view.
Other questions, comments, thoughts? Ryan?
I'll put myself back in the queue if folks have other questions. With this, just two, I think, technical questions, perhaps. Surface water diversion registration and reporting program, what's going to be, how do you define surface water withdrawal, right? Is it the water course definition? Is it all surface waters across the state? Is it just perennial streams? Like, what sort of withdrawal from where would someone need to do before they would have to report? One example I have is, farm irrigation ponds that are dug and spring fed that aren't that may technically be surface water based on our program's definition, but I'm curious what your program sees as an applicable surface water. I would think a withdrawal from the Otter Creek into an irrigation pond would certainly qualify, but the dispersion of stored water to a crop field is, I think, a different type of use. So trying to just narrow in and understand better where you're looking to.
Yeah, I would think there would be those waters that are subject to jurisdiction under the water quality standards. So if you're pumping into your private pond, it would be the act of pumping from the Otter Creek to your pond, not the withdrawal from your pond to your crops. Is that defined in your? I'm just trying to figure out
when going to explain this or understand this, is trying to understand where that definition is housed and whether that's clearly enumerated in the snowmaking withdrawal section. I'm not familiar with that. So if you could point me to that, that'd be
well,
really
I would.
helpful.
I can define it to what the waters of the state would be. With the snowmaking, it's a very similar. They would draw from a surface water, put it in their reservoirs for storage, and then use it to make snow when weather permits. But we'll reference. I can send a reference to where that definition is.
Thanks.
Jeff?
Let's see, just since we're on that topic that Ryan just raised, I would agree that is the approach that makes sense, and that's what has, as was noted, been done with respect to snowmaking water withdrawals, where the jurisdiction occurs at the point where you're withdrawing the water from the stream or river, and then when you put it into your constructed pond, that's not something that is restricted, because the whole idea is to put it into that pond so that you're not impacting the stream or the river. So I think that's the right approach. And the other point I was going to make, I wanted to reflect on John Groveman's comment, which I agree with, about this is not an exemption for snowmaking or drinking water. It's really I think it's best to take that word out of there, and just something to, I'm not sure what word you use, but recognizing that reporting is already being conducted, or somehow to make it clear that these entities are providing all this data and then some, that they're not being exempted from anything. So thank you, John. I think that was a good clarification.
Yeah. No, it's more, we don't want to duplicate the efforts of what these sectors are already doing. Yeah. But I will work, you're right, exemption's not the right word.
Yeah. And then, I think I wanted to make a comment about the kind of the idea of exemptions for other sectors. I mean, I think that at this point, I would agree with John that having this be as broad as possible to gather the data, understand what's going on, and be able to use that to make future decisions is really important. And I also think that from a regulatory fairness standpoint, I mean, certain sectors, ski areas and drinking water systems have been collecting all this information and providing usage information. And I think it clearly some leveling of a playing field, so that there's a requirement that others provide some data makes sense. Ultimately, it may be determined that they're so small and so insignificant in terms of impact that that the permitting should be not at those same thresholds. I don't know yet, but I think that gathering the data and understanding the extent of withdrawals, I think, is really important to be as broad as possible.
Thank you, Jeff. Any other thoughts, comments on this? Oh, David? David?
I wanted to go back to sort of the discussion about what do we mean by the threshold trigger of, is it an average, is it daily, is it whatever? I would like to suggest strongly that it somehow incorporates capacity. If someone is building an 8-inch pipe withdrawal system and claiming 5,000 gallons a day usage, that of course does not make sense. And I'm not suggesting that people would necessarily do that. But if you have the capacity to dry up or significantly impact one of these smaller streams, just the capacity, then in fact that should be the trigger for registering. We're not talking about permitting. We're not talking about, anything beyond the registration. But if you can move 50,000 gallons a day, we were concerned enough in terms of that amount or like amounts in terms of groundwater to require a permit. So, if you're in one of those 75% of streams that are second order or below, 50,000 gallons a day capacity is a big deal because all you have to do is keep the switch on. So, in terms of teasing out, do we want it to be daily average? Do we want it to be maximum withdrawal? Do we want it to be whatever? I think the notion of capacity has to be the trigger. Now, I don't know that everybody might agree with me, but it's also a static point of reference. It doesn't matter whether it's raining outside and the streams are all full, or that it's been dry for 2 years and the streams are all empty. The capacity is there to move that amount of water. Just tell us about it. That's what I'm suggesting.
Jeff?
So just on that point, David, I just want to make, I'm not sure I agree. I guess I was looking back, I just pulled up Act 199, which is what established that groundwater withdrawal reporting. And I think this is the final bill I'm looking at. Beginning September 1, 2009, any person that withdraws more than 20,000 gallons per day averaged over a calendar month at a single tract of land or place of business shall file a groundwater report, blah, blah, blah. So I think, unless this was not the final language, I think it was based on, actual usage and not based on, if you had a big pump or, big pipe. Is that not your recollection, or?
But that language means to me that in fact you are, that's an active withdrawal. And
right, but it doesn't say that if you have a pump.
Right, but it's a permit. It's a permit required, right?
Well, this was for the reporting. That the initial reporting that folks had to, and I think that's analogous to what we're talking about here, is gathering of data. I don't know. Think about it, because I think, I guess it seems like it gets it to sort of get to, well, why do you have this size pipe versus that size pipe, and it just seems like that's getting really speculative. And I sort of feel like, with the groundwater one, it was based on an actual usage amount, and it doesn't, we didn't get into the plumbing, but rather it was really what folks were taking. And it seems like this would be a consistent way to do it, as the agency has suggested here, in my mind anyway.
Well, I just wanted to open the discussion about you have a wet week and you don't withdraw, and then you have a dry week and you do withdraw, and or extended periods of time. And so I am concerned that someone turns the switch on and leaves it on.
Yeah, no, I hear you, but I think that's where this would be based on actual usage. And so, if by leaving the switch on, that meant you were taking more than 50,000 gallons a day, then that gets you into that next tier of having to meter. So I don't know. I think just having the capability isn't enough in my mind. I think it's the actual usage that we're really trying to capture with this reporting requirement.
I wonder if this goes back to adopting, maybe making that the maximum daily use, kind of meeting in the middle on this one. If, you know, obviously you'll use up more of your capacity, we'd probably get closer to that, what the infrastructure capacity is for use if we actually say maximum per day use, David. Maybe that is something we can adopt.
Okay, I just wanted to get that into the conversation because that may have been the final outcome on the bill. That doesn't mean that I necessarily had to agree with that provision. But if the agency has a methodology, then okay, maximum as opposed to capacity, sure.
I mean, we could, one thing we could do for guidance of implementation is, when you register, you may have put the location and the capacity of your equipment or pipe or what have you.
Yeah. Okay.
John?
Sorry about that. Yeah. So, Jeff, you hit on Jeff Crocker, one of the points I was going to make, but
Okay.
I wanted to, I want to actually kind of put it more squarely on the table for discussion. But Jeff Nelson is correct in how he read, how the groundwater law, is structured in terms of reporting and permitting. But I was going to point out that the law, and this is in what we drafted. I basically, when David and I go through what we drafted, I thought about a lot of different ways to do it, but I modeled it based on the groundwater law. It's different, but a lot of the framework is there. And in the reporting for the groundwater law, it says that you have to report the location, capacity, frequency, and rate of the withdrawal, and you have to describe how the water is used. So, I mean, I think that's I don't, Jeff Nelson and David and I were all in the room. We all helped craft that law. I think that we probably had a similar conversation, and we agreed that we wanted that information in addition to what you were talking about in terms of setting the threshold. So maybe the agency could think about that if you go back and
Yeah, certainly we can look at what you.
I may have lost John.
No, yeah, I did for a second. I think he's back.
Okay. Yeah, I look like I'm here, so
Yeah,
feel like I'm here.
You're here.
I brought Carrie Dolan with me, so this is great.
Yeah, we can look at what John and David proposed in terms of those, location, capacity, frequency, rate of diversion, and use, obviously, and what we set as our guidance for implementation. Any other thoughts on the registration reporting? Ryan?
Thanks. Sorry, I got kicked there for a while, so I missed a portion of the conversation. So apologies if my questions are duplicative. The comment I had is on the reporting requirements for surface water utilization, more than 50,000 gallons per day, the metering of the amount of water diverted. And I'm wondering about the economic burden of that on users and whether we would expect someone that's withdrawing that volume of water to already have a degree of metering in their operation, or if there are, estimates that can sufficiently satisfy that, rate of use per hours and gallon per minute pump. It's I think, pretty static to potentially estimate it. So that was just one concern that came up for the need for someone to purchase flow monitoring equipment for their withdrawals, and whether the state would offer compensation for farms that need to purchase that so they could monitor withdrawals for their irrigation operations, as an example, because they're currently, even if they're withdrawing 50,000 or more gallons per day, they should be doing it in compliance either with a permit or they're below the de minimis allowance. So it could be a significant cost and impact to an operation in a very high flow surface water, as an example.
Yeah, thanks for the question. In terms of, I don't know how much one of these metering would cost. We did set that 50,000 gallons per day, as we thought was a pretty high threshold to eliminate the amount of withdrawals that may fit into that requirement, and focusing probably more on the larger industrial ones that potentially already are metering or have metering requirements within permits that exist.
Yeah. Anyway, it was just a comment on that.
Okay.
I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I just, how precise do you really need?
Right.
If it's such a large water body, estimations probably
right.
be
yeah
useful. And that's
yeah.
only,
I
1.8
I guess that's a
acres,
question.
an acre inch of water withdrawal, so it's not a lot of acreage at that threshold.
I mean, that could be another discussion for the committee. We recommend this approach, but obviously we're open to what other committee members think. If they could use a similar approach to estimation with pump capacity and hours run, or what have you. So I guess I can put that to the bigger committee here. Jeff?
And just on that thought, Jeff, we were just talking about, that may be something that could be spelled out a little bit more in the guidance that the agency would ultimately implement,
Okay.
on how the sort of nuts and bolts of kind of metering, because I think there probably are some fairly low cost ways for certain types of operations, just, runtime on pumps and, a calculation of pump capacity and frictional losses and that sort of thing. But what I was going to mention, I just opened up chapter 24, the rule for groundwater, and I was looking at after saying this should be as broad as possible, I now see one of the exemptions in there was a groundwater withdrawal for fire suppression or other public emergency purposes. And it kind of makes me think, well, gee, say the local fire department has a dry hydrant and they need to withdraw some water to, put out a big fire that's in town. Are they supposed to, kind of fill out a form? I mean, it seems a little silly. I mean, so maybe that should be an exemption. I mean, here I am saying we should have an exemption, but I don't know. I mean, John, what do you think? I mean, it seems like that's one where it would be hard to argue that, they shouldn't be putting the fire out or, trying to worry about paperwork or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could have like an emergency provision, like something to deal with situations like that. So you wouldn't violate the law and you wouldn't be enforced against. And yeah, I mean, everyone I think agrees with what you're saying. That's not the intent, but I don't know that they would need a straight out full exemption, but just some provision that gives I know that Jeff Crocker, I know that there are provisions in the law that give the agency discretion in emergencies to make that evaluation, right? And to, right, to call it not a violation. So I could come up with some language, and I'm sure that your attorney could do that too.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Yep. We can look into that and add language, because our intent is not to, I think, to capture those. obviously.
Uh,
David?
Yeah, if I could, in terms of what John and I put forward, and this is what this language meant to me, is exactly what we're talking about. There's no alternative to the diversion that will have less of an impact on surface water quality. You got a dry hydrant, what's your option?
Yeah.
So I mean, that could be clarified, but it was a way of avoiding exemption as a term of art in the language. There's no option, you can do it.
Okay. Anything else on the registration reporting program? We have a little bit of work the agency does. Address some of your comments when we can flesh some of these out. But I think maybe if there is no more questions, comments, we can pivot to John and David's. I think David kind of makes a good segue there for me to pivot.
So I guess I'll start. I don't know how to share my screen. I don't think I need to. I'd prefer not to go through the rigmarole of doing that, and people
Okay.
can look at what we send out. It's pretty simple, and in any case, what I'm going to describe is that it's not meant to be. So this was just to set the context in this. At the last meeting, there seemed to be, real consensus. Maybe it was unanimous that we wanted to create a registration program as a committee, and we wanted to do that and get the data from the results of the registration before a regulatory program went into effect. And I think there was an agreement on that, but then there was structurally not agreement or clarity on kind of how that would work, and because I have been involved with a lot of these regulatory efforts, including the groundwater effort. It was important to me and to David, who similarly has been involved with the groundwater effort and other efforts, to transition to have a phase in, basically, to get the registration program going, collect the data, and then move into that next phase, which is to have a surface water diversion permitting program. And so we agreed to lay out how that could work. Like, what would that look like in the report? And so we said we would draft that. So basically, the first section is just to show that they would be reporting first. I picked a date, and I do think I don't know that, when the legislature, gets a hold of this, that, need to choose a date. So I just was basically trying to show in the first section that, we're sitting here in 2021, that, if the legislature took action, that by January 1st, 2023, a full year from this January, people would begin to register, and that information would be gathered, as we talked about just a minute ago. I took just from the groundwater law. I didn't say anything about what would be the trigger for the registration, because I knew that the agency was doing that, so I avoided that. But then took from the groundwater law that we want to know the location, capacity, frequency, the rate of diversion, and how the water is being used, because I thought that made sense. And then the next section is basically saying that after you gather that data, I picked a year later. We could debate the time frame, but it would certainly be, a time after the registration data came in, and that there was enough time for the agency to evaluate that data. That the same legislation that could pass, that could create the registration program, could then say, mandate that the agency then use that data to create the permitting program. And it's, I've said in here that the permitting program has got to be based on the data collected. And the first, and I just laid out what and I want to really stress that, David and I are open to, these were not set in stone, like the provisions in here. It was basically a framework. So in our minds, the framework should first, what's the threshold for the permitting program? That's got to be based on the data that's collected. The agency collects that data, would engage in a rulemaking, where people, the regulated community, other stakeholders like the people represented on this group could weigh in on what the threshold is. And then really, as I looked at the groundwater law, a lot of the structure of the groundwater law for groundwater withdrawal seemed to apply. And so, in that law, there's a section about application requirements. So I mostly modeled the application requirements based on the groundwater law. I changed them to make where they didn't fit, but thinking that maybe the committee at this point could agree that any permitting rule would have application requirements, and this is what they could be. Again, completely up for debate in terms of the details. And then similarly, the other requirements that, things that you knew that you'd want to have in a permitting program, you wanted to make sure that efficient use and conservation of water was part of the plan to divert water. Obviously, I think we all agree that to get a permit for a diversion, you have to meet the water quality standards. That's a broad requirement. I think it makes sense to go broad rather than to pick and choose specific standards, because we know, as we all know, they're very complicated regulations, and we know which ones are applicable. But that seemed like a bottom line for us. Number 5, we felt that there should be some recognition that there are times where, due to the natural conditions, if there are drought conditions, that water won't be able to be diverted, so that need to be accounted for in the regulatory program in some way. I added that, that the diversion shouldn't affect wetlands, and comply with the wetland rules. As I wrote that, Jeff, this is a Crocker question. I know that we passed a law last year that folded wetland protection into the water quality standards, so maybe that's not necessary anymore. But it's something to think about. So that may not be necessary, because I think we're now looking at wetland impacts under the water quality standards, but I wanted to flag it, and just something that, maybe the agency lawyers could take a look at.
Okay.
Alternatives are always, part of these sort of permits, like they are with the snowmaking program, and so, I included that. And then, the ever popular catch-all of whatever else the agency thinks it needs to do to make the program work. And then obviously renewal of permits, and that's something because that's something we heard about from the experts that testified, is that, the investments that people make in these diversions, and, to create a scheme around permit renewal. So, we wanted to show what the framework could look like. Again, really the point of this is to say that, David and I believe that we can make a recommendation to the legislature that they should immediately, implement a registration program and recommend thresholds for that, as we were just talking about, and requirements for that. And then in that same legislation, give A&R authority, or actually mandate that A&R then take that data and create this regulatory program, and we can give sideboards in the report, and we could debate, whether or not what we've come up with are the right sideboards, but and not married to any of these words at all, So I hope that makes sense. Happy to answer any questions. That was really what we set out to do. David, I don't know, anything that I got wrong, please correct, and then amplify what you think needs to be amplified.
No, I think people get a sense of what is there off of what you said, and especially if they've had an opportunity to read through it. I think the groundwater law was instructive in terms of setting in place both collection of data and an agency requirement to responsibly deal with what they found. And that's sort of the same thought behind what John and I have presented here, as opposed to a simple instruction for the agency to start recording all of the withdrawals. And I think, based on the response and everything that happened subsequent to the groundwater law, that Vermonters were comfortable with it. I don't recall any sort of outburst of dissent or objection after the law went into effect. So I guess I'll stop there and just say that, we recommend that it be a package of what's presented to the legislature. They will do as they will do based on what they hear from their constituents. But that this committee go forward with both a registration and instructions to the agency for permitting.
So if I can just add just one more thing, because David jogged my memory in talking, is so I think it's important. So there are a lot of similarities. So with the groundwater withdrawal program, that's exactly what they did. They basically tiered it and had the data collection, and then actually the statute was very prescriptive with regard to how the withdrawal program would work, and then also mandated that A&R adopt rules. And that was, I think, that was, because it was a multi-year effort and the committee really dug into the details. I don't think it's necessary. I think you can do with the framework. I also want to point out that I think similarly, there really wasn't a debate that we would need some sort of a program with groundwater, that we wanted the data first. And I think same thing is true here. I mean, I think we know that we want parity, the ski areas are being regulated through the snowmaking permits and the drinking water systems are regulated. We know we want a program, just like with groundwater, we knew we wanted a program. So we're really taking the same approach, and we're actually being much less directive in the groundwater law. We created an interim permit program because there was so much concern about what we didn't know about existing withdrawals. We went and created an interim permit program that went away once the final permit program went into place. So we're not suggesting that here. We think that we could move in a stepwise fashion. But it was striking to me when I look back at that effort that, that there are a lot of similarities. And here we're not saying create this interim program. We're saying let's not delay. Let's kind of move from data collection into dealing with these through some sort of regulations. So I'll stop there. Let you guys have at it.
Carrie?
Thank you and good afternoon. And I apologize for being a few minutes late. I thank you, John and David, for putting this together. I think that it's always easy to take shots on something that's been drafted. So so that you did the heavy lifting here, and I greatly appreciate it. And in fact, I find it exceptional in its approach in terms of what we're looking for here. A couple of questions, if I may. One would be just related to the first part regarding reporting in terms of the location, capacity, frequency, and rate, of whether we want to also include timing of as to when the withdrawals would take place. I think just knowing the duration and the actual specificity on a calendar year basis perhaps might be helpful to know when the demand is if we're trying to track demand and we have multiple demand on a given watershed. That might be helpful. So I just flagged that. Maybe we get at it anyway with respect to when we the periods of the calendar year where we have minimum flows, and we are always concerned about August flows, for example. But I just flagged that as perhaps a bit more information that might be helpful. And I also, just if I may ask, and I do appreciate the focus on water efficiency, and whether we could do anything more in addition to this in terms of creating incentives for water efficiency or conservation. I know in the early days, the Public Utility Commission really promoted the concept of least cost planning. And the idea would be encouraging those in the regulated area to conduct least cost planning over time that would be updated periodically. But that helps to drive home that the more you are efficient with energy or more efficient with electricity, or in this case, water, you're actually creating a resource. And it helps to have those entities that are putting a demand on the water resources have that added incentive to look at their entire system and how to foster or integrate efficiency into or that least cost planning into their programming. And that had typically been just part of a reporting component to that kind of regulation. So I'll pause on those 2 points.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are both really good ideas, and it goes to the point I stressed that yeah, this was a framework. Like, we'd hope that we'd get worked over, and we'd improve it, and there are things missing here, I'm sure, and I think, yeah, I think those are really great points, and be happy to, in the next drafts, include some language along those lines. My hope is, to Ryan's point, that from here we have this conversation, then we go back and the agency will do some redrafting, and we could do some redrafting, and then in future meetings, keep getting closer and closer to the final, what would go into the report.
Thank you.
Jeff?
Sure. So thanks, John and David. I think this is definitely very helpful. Obviously, a couple of thoughts. We want to make sure that this framework includes the recognition that, with respect to the ski areas, the existing Chapter 16 water withdrawals for snowmaking rule contains all these requirements, and that this is something that's already being done, and that there's a process that they are subject to. So we want to, and I won't call it an exemption, because it's not an exemption. It's right. Existing regulatory coverage that achieves the same outcome. So we want to make sure that that's the case. Secondly, I guess just sort of how and when this gets triggered. Obviously, there's a volume threshold, but then there's also kind of how do you deal with existing water withdrawals, what degree of grandfathering there is, and looking at the Chapter 24, the groundwater withdrawal permitting, that got triggered or gets triggered for new withdrawals and increased withdrawals, and that seems like something that we ought to have more discussion of, sort of how to structure this in a way that isn't, terribly disruptive to, I think, to the folks that have been out there. If you've been taking water for 50 years at some small amount, and there's been no, finding that it's negatively impacting the surface water, then allowing some degree of grandfathering there would seem like it would make sense. So I think we need to think about that. And then I guess my final point for right now is just in terms of the timing. If the reporting doesn't go into effect until January 1 of 2023, then it's going to be hard to use the data that's collected to inform the rule because, even though that sounds like a long time, for those of us who have been involved in the development of an agency rule, it takes, I think the agency would have to start working on the rule in early 2023 in order for it to be adopted in January of 2024. So if you're starting work on the rule in 2023 and you're talking about water withdrawals that might not be occurring, the reporting of which might not be occurring until summer of 2023, it's almost like you need another year. You know what I'm saying? To be able to actually gather a year's worth of data and look at it and understand what it means to then be able to bake that into how the regulatory program gets done. And, I think that is important because you look at the groundwater and we had different thresholds. There was a 20,000 gallon per day threshold for reporting and then a permitting threshold of 57.6. So, I think the data can help inform what we do in the rule. But so that's a thought.
Yeah, no, those are all good points, Jeff. And to take your last point first, which is a really good point. I mean, I was factoring in that Jeff Crocker's efficiency is just so high that he could work magic like no other bureaucrat I've ever seen. But
Right.
but maybe I'm putting.
There are all those hearings.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you should see those 401s for the hydros. They just, it's, as you know, it's a bear. But no, that's a really good point. And I think we want to make it realistic. We agree that the data needs to be used to shape the trigger. So I would look, Jeff, to you and the agency in terms of what you think is reasonable amount of time to be able to look at the data and then make a proposal, because that'll just kick off a rulemaking effort where I'm sure that you would do pre-rulemaking outreach to certainly the people on this committee and then other people that are, and through the registration program, like we were talking about before, that's kind of another advantage of tiering it is that you kind of who the people are, right? So who kind of you'd reach out to and target to get feedback on how to structure the trigger. Although it is funny with groundwater, with the interim program, we just picked a number, and I think we stuck with that number pretty much. But I do think that, I mean, it seems that there are differences between groundwater and surface water. But it is funny. I do remember. I think it's the same number that we just picked, and it wasn't out of nowhere. It was based on testimony from Jeff Nelson and other people, right, that had come in. But I think that's a fair point. I don't know, David, do you want to say something about the existing uses? Do you want to? I see you have your hand up. Or anything else?
Yeah. Wait a minute. Let me get my hand down here. I can only do one thing at once. Think about it. January 1, 2023 is well after the end of the legislative session when this report will go into the legislature. Should they decide to move forward with this, and I see no reason why they wouldn't, the gathering of information, and this is why I suggested going and using an existing approach that the agency has used. And Jeff pointed out that the dams program had a list of users. Well, various agency arms have lists of various users. And I'm not sure that you're going to need until January 1 to get a useful, functional, and informative outreach effort in place. And reporting is, it doesn't, I think if we make it clear that a letter or a form is available online, or send us a letter with the enclosed information. So I'm not sure that it's going to take a full year to gather that information. That said, we put this date forward to stimulate this very conversation. and to see what the agency thought about being able to do that necessary outreach and what the timing might be. If in fact they can't begin to do the outreach until January 1, then everything that's just been said by the people on the committee, I agree with. It's tough to turn a rule around, but if they can have a reasonably competent list of users available by October 1st, 2022, suddenly all of these dates make a lot more sense. So that's what we're bringing to the discussion.
Yeah. No, those are all good points. And I think around this date, I can talk it over with the other members of the agency, and we can either propose a alternative date or stick with this date. But I have some other hands up here. Jordan.
Hey everyone, I'm Jordan Gonda. I am replacing Matt Chapman as the agency legal support for the committee. So I haven't had a ton of time to get up to speed, but I'm generally in the know about the work that you're doing. And I have actually watched one of your recorded videos on your webpage. So if you thought that, oh, no one will ever watch these, you're wrong. I had a quick question, John, about the language, just to kind of wrap my head around what the agency might ultimately be asked to do. In the permitting section under A7, the criterion that there's no alternative to the diversion that would have less of an impact on surface water quality. Just wanted to understand this a little bit better, and if this is ultimately going to act as a prohibition on anything that can't be demonstrated to be most efficient, or have an alternative to be less impactful. Just if you had an idea of what that standard would be when the agency is looking at these applications coming in, and what that is effectively intended to do in terms of sort of assessing these activities when they're proposed.
Yeah, sure. It's nice to see you, Jordan. Haven't seen you in a long time. We'll miss Matt, but it's great to have you on board. Yeah, I mean, this is, like I said, it seems this is a fairly standard requirement. This is in the groundwater report withdrawal program as well. It's also part of the snowmaking rules. I think, really on the simplest level, it's basically forcing an applicant to say, hey, what do you need this water for? And is there another way to get it, like that would have less of an impact than taking it, in this case, from the surface water? Consultants, and we have a couple on the committee, are, I think, pretty experienced with these sort of alternatives analysis. And, I would say most of the time there isn't an alternative that would meet the need, that would have less of an impact. But the goal is just to require that sort of kind of thinking about, well, what else is out there? How else can we accomplish this? I don't know if that helps you. I don't know, David, would you add anything about it? And I'm sure that Jeff and Evan will have something to say about this as well. You're muted, David.
Just what I mentioned earlier, that this is sort of the clause where we just ask all the fire departments that maintain dry hydrants to tell us about them, and that's it. There's no other alternative to their being having access to sufficient flows to be able to fight fires. Boom, done. But we know where they are, and in fact, we actually already know where they are. I mean, the agency pays local fire departments or supports local fire departments by paying part of the cost of installing dry hydrants. But let's just get that into our database, and there's no option. So that's part of what we meant by that. And then back to John's discussion about standard language to be flexible.
Thank you.
Hey, Jeff.
Jeff?
I know I'm a little bit out of order, but could I just react to
Sure.
what John just and
Yep.
David on that one point? In response to Jordan's question, I agree that the assessment of alternatives is something that there is a protocol and a knowledge of how to go about that. I mean, there's a guidance document that is used in the context of the snowmaking water withdrawal rules, and there have been many alternatives analyses that have been done over the years for different ski areas, and we've done many of them. Jeff has reviewed many of them, and I think in most cases it is fairly straightforward what the alternative is that has the least impact on streams and rivers, but not always. And I think that it's something that is I think it's scalable to the size of the facility, the size of the amount of water that's used and so forth. So I don't see that as a particularly difficult thing to get at, and I do agree with John. I think it's important, and I think it's something that I would say, if we're going to move forward with a permitting program, ought to be part of it.
Yeah, and I just I appreciate that, and thanks for weighing in. I guess just sort of with the I see that in A2 it would be an application requirement to do the alternatives analysis, and 2AG there. I just wondered about the significance of provision A7, which is an additional element that would be required under the rule, and I wondered if that was something different, if that was.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So it's because when you file your application, basically, I mean, you have to address the criteria, whatever in the rule. I mean, I guess you could, and Jordan, I want to reemphasize that the import of what we submitted was to show how this could be structured, completely not meant to be, this is exactly how it should read and appear. We wanted to just show how this, could look in terms of creating a framework. I see your point that, and I think it's a good point, that there aren't other application requirements that just say your application has to address all the criteria that we come up with, in a rule. The alternatives analysis is one of the criteria. Like it doesn't say your application needs to show how you meet the water quality standards, for example, so that's a good point. So maybe you don't need it. Maybe you don't need it in both places. Maybe you need a catch-all that just says your application has to address all the requirements that the agency sets forth, in a rule. And that would be fine. You're probably right. That's what you're going for. I think that you're right about that. Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, I just was concerned that A7 provision would require, or maybe interpreted as requiring the agency to deny a permit if they identified that there could be other alternatives.
Yeah, definitely not. That was not.
Okay.
And I think you're right. I think maybe we could come up with like a catch-all. It's sort of, maybe you don't need to say it because it's so inherently, you have to obviously have an application that addresses the requirements.
Yes. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
No, that's really helpful. Thanks,
Yeah.
John.
Yeah.
Ryan?
Thanks. Big picture comment. Question for you, Jeff, and then Crocker, and then commentary on the parallels with the groundwater withdrawal sectional law and its implementation. The first is, in designing studies that look at monitoring, especially around natural resources, I think you have to do a multiple year investigation to fully understand, or assessment to understand, how climatic variability affects water users I'm just narrowly thinking about agriculture. I'm not sure about other users that may be more static. But obviously, the growing of fruited crops is dependent on precipitation, antecedent soil moisture conditions, and timing of droughts or surplus rain. And so, to suggest that a fully baked permitting program, needs to be submitted along with registration and reporting framework, I'm not fully on board with, absent evidence that there is an impact, and it's an impact that has a deleterious effect and needs to be permitted by the state. Jeff Crocker, question for you about as trying to understand what goes on in parallel if the reporting and registration program moves forward. For those that are going to withdraw above de minimis levels, they have to check in with you for a permit of some degree or authorization to do that. Is that correct?
Yeah, we right now submit like a letter of authorization with the de minimis rate.
Okay, because I think when we see 50,000 on the registration program, I think it makes sense depending on where you are in the state, and that's the point I want to make. Little Otter Creek, 5% of 7Q10 is 45,000 gallons a day, whereas the Otter Creek is 4.7 million gallons a day. And so the scale of withdrawal before you cause an impact, I think, that would require permitting or would actually impact resources or downstream users, I think is very divergent and acknowledge a lot of upland or small streams. Probably folks aren't irrigating out of them because they're probably dry a lot of the year. So I think to understand the scale and scope, the ag census and the irrigation census data demonstrates you're going to find a lot of very small vegetable producers that are withdrawing water, and that's going to likely be your largest agricultural user. And so, insofar as looking at potential impacts, I don't forecast running into too many surprises out there. So, just trying to reiterate, I think there's something in place if someone is going to cause an impact, and we really have to understand what that impact is. Before moving to baking a full permitting program. The second, and we haven't really talked about this much, and no one's really put the purpose or the whereases together if we are going to endeavor to do that. But I think there's a lot of things that are laid out in the groundwater withdrawal section of law that some farmers and others will push forward. As I understand the program, 10 BSA 1417 and 1418, both the reporting and withdrawal permit requirements don't apply to groundwater withdrawals for farming. And insofar as I hear it's been a successful program and there wasn't a lot of outcry, I think that the findings, the recognition that agricultural domestic needs of groundwater withdrawal from the state were a high priority, and there's not a large potential impact or it's distributed across the landscape. I think one needs to do the research to understand what the scale and scope of agriculture or other users are to inform the rate of withdrawal, the size of the stream, whether maps can be published. If you're here, you can do this many gallons per day before you have to do these determinations. I think there's a degree of efficiency and administrative burden that will be placed on small users of water that may be having no impact on downstream water resources. And then my final point, trying to draw the groundwater parallel of alternative questions is, well, sure, the crop can just die in the field. You don't need to irrigate, but is it that landowner's right to be able to use that water to grow a better crop, provided it's not impacting flow or downstream users or whatever other criteria you want to set up? That puts that use for growing food and perhaps sometimes a category that's different from other uses. So I apologize for rambling on here, but wanted to raise those three points about research before setting regulatory frameworks, new ones. Thanks.
John?
So, we've had this conversation before. Getting a letter that someone is not above a de minimis withdrawal is not a program that's protecting our surface waters. I don't know how many people ask for those letters, Jeff, but they do it, if they want to, and it's not like the agency has a force of people riding around the state looking at what people are doing and enforcing, well, first trying to then stop people and determine what they're doing, whether it violates the de minimis withdrawal, and then taking some action. And that's why we're here, is because there's a recognition that general provision in the law that says, you can't act in a way that violates the water quality standards is not an oversight program. So I thought, I think that, I thought we agreed on that as a group, but if we don't, I think that's why the legislature asked us to come together. So basically, they recognize that there's a gap in our regulatory programs, and we're trying to close that gap. And and we're trying to do it in a reasonable way that would have registration, which I said before has to include everybody, so we know what's going on, and then create a trigger for any sort of a regulatory program that I'm sure will account for the type of factors that Ryan mentioned. But let's get the data first. And I'm just going to state, really clearly that with the groundwater program, it was a mistake to not include agriculture, and it was a political decision. It was not based on science. It was not based on managing the resource, and we knew that at the time, and we know it today. But with surface water, I don't see how you could manage use of water from surface waters if you're not dealing with every single use that is above the threshold that the state determines needs to be regulated. Just carving out users that could have an effect on the resource, on other users. If farmers really aren't having an impact because it's such small withdrawals, then there's not a problem. Then they'll be under the threshold for permitting and regulation. Or if they're above it, they'll be able to clearly meet it. So I want to stop repeating mistakes of the past based on the fact that we made mistakes in the past. And that's what I think we did with the groundwater program. And, if it was up to me, we'd go back and rewrite that law and do it the right way. But as we all know, it's not up to me. So, so that's my 2 cents on that.
Gary?
Sorry.
Carry
Go
over.
ahead.
Yeah.
I'll wait.
Oh, just a second. I was going to reiterate, I do appreciate Ryan's comments, and I think we had talked about this in the past and how I think all of us agree that we want to support our current uses, whether it be ski areas and agriculture. This is about how to preserve going forward and into the future with an uncertain climate and yet growing demand on our water resources, our surface waters. How do we have our cake and eat it too? How do we maintain our water quality standards while at the same time supporting our agriculture into the future? We see out west, where they obviously have a different climate than us, but we see the turmoil associated with poor planning, and where the demand wasn't based on the science, and there was a lack of understanding of what that the volume of water that's available for in-stream flows and the integrity of that, as well as the health of our ecosystems and the demand for water for our own public uses and business uses, agricultural uses. So I think this is about smart resource planning to make sure that we are in fact supporting agriculture into the future and providing for and meeting the needs for our industries such as our ski area, our ski industry. But I do appreciate your you're raising these issues, because this is why we are here today.
Thanks, Carrie. Jeff, then Ryan.
So Ryan's comment actually triggered a thought and made me look a little bit more at number 7 about no alternative. And, you know, reflecting back on the snowmaking rule, there's a phrase that comes between those two words, no alternative, and that phrase is reasonable and feasible. And I think that we do need to enshrine that concept because there's always an alternative. I mean, that farmer, rather than taking the water, can let the crop die. That's an alternative. I'm not saying it's a good alternative. And so I think that the reasonable and feasible, or whatever other language, John and David, you feel is appropriate, you know, that concept is kind of how I think we've achieved what we've been able to achieve with the snowmaking rule, and you know, be able to come up with systems that are protecting stream flow, protecting the environment, and also, you know, allowing ski areas to continue to operate. So just wanted to highlight that.
Thanks, Jeff. Ryan?
Yeah, thanks. Jeff, this is more a question for you. You know, sorry, Crocker. My question, I guess, is, you know, talking about meeting water quality standards. We're talking about flow regimes and flow delivery. Trying to, and I acknowledge and appreciate, you got to know where withdrawals are happening and how much before you can, you know, say one way or the other. But, you know, through my involvement with tactical basin planning and understanding what impairments exist out there, you know, are we reaching threatening levels of, you know, low flow in regions of the state? You know, this is I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. I'm trying to understand, you know, what in 3 years of gathering data, perhaps more, perhaps less, you know, it seems that there aren't these unpermitted massive, I can't say that, I don't know, but you know, where where we're not having the flow that we need in the state, and is that driven by climate variability more broadly, or is it these water users? And I think, you know, having the data in hand is going to be very important before to making sure that the permitting program to be built, you know, corresponds and protects and regulates those uses appropriately. I'm just, you know, people are talking about we need to meet water quality standards, and I guess I'm not trying to be dense. It's like, where are we not meeting them for this criteria?
Well, I mean, I guess in terms of meeting water quality standards, in terms of flow and water level management, you know, the agency does have a list of waters that are regulated, or there's withdrawals on it. It's called the Part F list, that where we would consider those waters potentially not meeting standards. So there's a list. Obviously, it's not entirely probably thorough, or doesn't include everything, because it's only the ones we know about. And I would say that, you know, there potentially, you know, as we go through this, we may find that we do have greater use, but we don't really know that at this point. I think in general, in terms of climate variability, you know, what flow we're getting, you know, the water quality standards are basically based on, you know, the natural condition, natural flows. And if we're in a drought, you know, although have low water, you know, if there's no removal of that water from the stream, that stream is still technically going to meet water quality standards from a condition of reviewing it through the water quality standards, because that would be what natural conditions, you know, droughts will occur, floods will occur, and that is part of the natural flows of these systems. So did that answer your question, Ryan?
Yeah, that's helpful. And I wasn't familiar with the list you referenced. So I got to familiarize myself with that one. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Other thoughts, comments? John? You're on mute, John.
Sorry about that. Sorry. So two things. One is I think Jeff Nelson's comment is a good one, and in the quick drafting, I wasn't intending to not mimic the language of the snowmaking rules, but I think we should. It's been an effective alternatives analysis program, and we should mimic that, and that would address some of the concerns that Ryan raised. In terms of the question, I also, Jeff Crocker, thought about the list of threatened waters and that, the work that the agency does. But in a way, Ryan's question, I think, helps make the point that we really need a holistic program to look at this, because that list is based on when the agency samples, right? So the agency goes out during field season and they sample waters, and they use the aquatic biota metrics to determine what meets standards. And so you're getting a snapshot, like what do the waters look like in the spring? What do they look like at times in the summer? And what's the bug population? Is it healthy, biologically? And like, so for snowmaking, for example, that came into the regulatory system because of Act 250, right? And so ski areas are highly regulated. And it wasn't so much about, what the waters were doing when the agency folks went out and sampled them, but it was knowing, okay, you're in Act 250, when do you need the water? Oh, we need the water obviously for the winter. Okay, well, what's an important time in the life cycle of certain fish species? And so we created a program to protect the fish and water quality at times we knew was sensitive, but that necessarily might not have been necessarily caught by the agency's own monitoring programs, right? Depending on when they went out sampling and what the metrics were. And I think that the snowmaking program under Act 250 has been a real success, because now we found a way to, the ski areas can have water so they can make snow and run their businesses, but we do it in a way that we can protect the life cycle of some of the most sensitive species. And that may or may not be caught with the agency's monitoring, and that's why I think that's the value of having these type of programs, So Ryan could go look at like Part F of the Section 303 of the Clean Water Act list, and it'll show whatever it shows in terms of waters we know have low flow and are don't meet standards or threatened to maybe not meet standards, but it definitely doesn't show the picture, right, of what the impacts are through the whole cycle and of these waters. And I apologize as a lawyer talking about all these technical issues with these really smart hydrologists here, but let's see how I did based on decades of just listening to people like them talk. So, but that's kind of how I look at it.
David?
A little history. When we did the groundwater program, we did it partially as a preventative program because we had a rogue company going around taking groundwater resources and exporting them outside of watersheds. And I believe it was Nabisco, or I don't know, one of the multinational corporations. And
Nestle.
Nestle.
I don't want to slander Nabisco and the Keebler elves and all the good people over there.
Well, we now have some changes that are being thrust upon Vermont and this resource. Climate change, we have touched on it. Warm water is death to cold water species of trout, and that is of concern. There are changes going on in both scale and scope of agricultural activities in terms of water uses. Nobody used to run 15,000 maple taps and use a stream to cool, their operation, but we now have several, as I understand it, in the state that are doing that size of operation. As an example of the difference in agriculture and what's happening. So part of the reason that many of us wanted to have this discussion, have it in a formal setting, involve as many of the stakeholders as possible, was that we see changes on the horizon and wanted to be proactive. Now, that makes it very difficult, as John has pointed out, for the agency sampling, where they do 1/5 of the watersheds every year, which means your watershed is probably going to wait 5 years until someone comes by and figures out that there's a problem. That's not a pejorative comment. That's the way it is, and it's been that way for a very long time. So this is as much preventative as it is reactive, and I am pleased that we're a step ahead, maybe, to avoiding some ecological and economic problems down the road.
Carrie?
Thank you. I appreciate this conversation. It's a very healthy conversation to have us put everything on the table and think about these and chew on these. So I thank you and all for your comments. One thing I would appreciate hearing from Jeff Nelson on this. You did have an earlier comment about other exemptions, and I actually understand with the ski areas agreement that's already I think all of us my understanding is that we have consensus around how we treat ski areas and the preservation of that existing program for ski areas. You had mentioned another comment about potential exemptions of other users. And I just want to flag that, and I welcome your further consideration about that. And what gives me a little bit of pause is how I see this as how we're all in it together. We all want to figure out how to protect our resources into the future, given our demand and given the health of our river systems themselves. And because of we really need to all be in it together, I see it as difficult to contemplate what that additional exemption could look like or could be. And I want to flag that. And related to that, I think that's where we got into the turmoil out west when because those sorts of exemptions can, in fact, I think, result in our falling short of what our long-term objectives are, and that is supporting multiple uses and the health of our rivers. What you play out west, that concept of those exemptions, and that becomes the first in right, first in use, first in right kind of framework, because they're already using the resource, they're already, using that terminology, an exempt or an appropriation of their water use. And and if we try to articulate an approach that tries to capture that, I see us moving that even that much farther away from our riparian common law water use legal framework. So I just wanted to flag that. I welcome your further thinking about what you were contemplating, but I'm hopeful that that we're not trying to then consider other than the work that the agency needs to do in terms of thresholds. I think that's absolutely critical so that we're not chasing our tail, trying to get at the de minimis uses. And as the concerns that Ryan had mentioned about the minor impacts, but we're really trying to have an approach that makes sense for us as we contemplate a sustainable water management system into the future.
Yes. So thank you for that. I guess the two contexts in which I was talking about, and I don't want to keep using the word exemption where I don't think it's fitting, but so there's existing water use reporting for snowmaking, obviously, and also for drinking water. And so to avoid duplication, that those activities would not require reporting under this new scheme, because they already are. They're giving as much data, if not more, than this would contemplate. But again, it's, as John pointed out, that really isn't an exemption. It's really the fact that it's already being done. The second point that I raised after looking at the groundwater rule, chapter 24, was, what about firefighting and other emergency uses? And then Dean mentioned something about, we should at least know where the dry hydrants are, but maybe we already do. And so I guess I'm sort of feeling like having some kind of record keeping related to where the local fire department has a dry hydrant, that doesn't seem unreasonable. I guess I can't see a scenario that makes a ton of sense for telling a local fire department that they have to get a permit to be able to put a fire out. And obviously fires are far more rare, thankfully, here in the East than what we see out in the Western U.S. And I'm certainly not advocating one way or the other here. I just sort of feel like that's, to me, an emergency use is an emergency use. It's not happening very often. It is for protection of life and public safety. And it seems like there should be, whether it's in a true flat out exemption or an allowance of some kind, it just strikes me that we should value that need, that public need, and make sure that we're not creating a hindrance to protecting life and property in that context.
Thank you. That was helpful. Thank you.
Any other thoughts, questions? One thing I thought, Jeff, you had talked about existing uses and grandfathered uses, and maybe we look to the snowmaking rules again and how we looked at those uses and expanding, systems, and maybe try to adopt something that's similar in context. So
yeah, I think that would make sense.
Yeah. Evan?
Yeah, I was just curious if you could maybe just briefly mention what that provision is in the snowmaking guidance, because I was curious about what New Hampshire and Minnesota did, and looking back, it looks like New Hampshire basically grandfathered any withdrawal that came before that regulation. I don't remember Minnesota, but
yeah, for the snowmaking rule, and Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, it was the expanding existing systems. It was an acre threshold, or you changed your pump capacity if you increased your pump capacity, that you could trigger compliance with the snowmaking rules. There was also, I think, like a provision in there that was based on time to bring it into compliance. Where I think those are the two that I can recall, Jeff. I don't know if there was any.
Yeah, no, that's it. And there was, we had thresholds, percentage thresholds for increase in pumping capacity or increase in trail coverage that would trigger what's called an expanded existing system, and trigger going through the full alternatives analysis, looking at, offstream storage and changes in conservation flow. So That was one piece of it, and then the other piece of it is for a new system. So you have a brand new water withdrawal, like for example, the one that Mount Snow built a few years ago down in Cold Brook. That came in as a new system and had to go through the alternatives analysis and all of the parts of the rule applicable to new systems. So it was just that tiering, and I think the groundwater rule, Chapter 24, does a similar sort of thing in terms of jurisdiction.
Great, thanks for that.
Yep. Any other questions? Maybe time. We kind of added this as if this may be the time. Our third bullet point was to review the duties again to get a sense of where each of the members with us are on the, I think, 6 assigned duties that were in Act 173. If
folks are ready to, and I have some thoughts. Obviously, they're constantly evolving as we learn more and as we talk more. But I don't know if folks are ready to be kind of put on the spot yet, or want to think about it some more, or what?
Yeah, how do we want to go about this? Do we want to share our thoughts here, or take some time and share our thoughts in writing? What does the group think? Discuss more about the proposal on permitting.
I mean, I think that, I'm open to any way to go, but it seems like based on this discussion, there would be value in, and maybe we could talk about the best way to go about it. I don't know if the agency wants to refine, the registration draft based on comments, and maybe it's time to
Yeah, I can do that.
start submitting things out for people to like mark up. I don't know, to use a Google Doc or what the best way to do it. I mean, and similarly, if people were, I'm willing to continue with David to do the drafting of the other part of it, unless you guys want to take it over and Jordan wants to, take that over. I mean, and maybe that would be more appropriate, having it come from one source now that you've got to start on it, and then schedule a meeting to go over the drafts and then start. I don't know. I guess we have to vote at some point on what we want in the report.
I think we can share a document. Can everyone access like a OneDrive document? That may be the easiest thing for us to do, and that way you can see markups and comments within one document.
Yeah, I've had a hard time. I mean, maybe it'll work. I know David has as well with some of the agency OneDrive stuff. I'm willing to try it, but I just want to. Right, David? We've had some problems. Remember that?
Yeah. The other thing is that there absolutely has to be a drop dead date. Past this point, no comments. You've lost your chance, and otherwise this will string out until December 14th at 11:59 p.m. And in terms of when you look at the 6 things in the legislation, what I'm surprised at and pleased about is that, based on the conversation going around the Zoom pictures here, how much we are in accord on what are in those 6. If we work out the details on John's proposal in terms of the permitting and the timing and the intensity of it, it's amazing how much we are in accord with each other. We may not agree word for word, but I think there's something there that we will be able to agree on with hopefully minimal work.
Yeah, I would agree. And I also would note, David, that it seems like as I look at the 6 duties, we've, I think, really focused pretty well on talking about and addressing these items. I guess as we get towards the end of it, legislative changes, it seems to me that of necessity is going to be kind of, at the end of our process, because that's when, we will have, really nailed down what these recommendations are going to be for the reporting piece and for the permitting piece. And then some lawyer will tell us, well, you have to change this, that, and the other thing in statute.
Yeah.
Right, John?
Well, it's really interesting because I had asked Ledge Council if they would operate the website where people can plug in to see the recordings of these meetings and whatever. And I was told in no uncertain terms that no, it's the agency's responsibility. But we will do the drafting based on the recommendations of the committee. So I think Ledge Council is a player when we get to the point where, okay, just as Jeff said, what is going to have to change based on these recommendations?
Right. Hey, Jeff Crocker, Kathy Erfer is in the waiting room. She just texted me and asked to let her in. Yeah, I don't know if
She
you see
may
it.
be in the wrong waiting room.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. She has the wrong link.
Yeah, there
Yeah.
was a couple links because I upgraded it to an enhanced license with a phone-in option. She should have that link. It's the latest email I sent out around
Right.
1 o'clock.
I'll let her know. Yeah. Thank you.
Also let her know I've recorded it, so
Right.
she can. No, I agree. Yeah, I think when we get to duty 5, it's really handing off our recommendation to Ledge Council and agency legal staff to kind of craft what needs to be changed or what in the statute. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I think generally we are, the details need to be fleshed out a bit more on some of this, but I think, in general, there's a large agreement across the group on some of this stuff. So,
So anyhow, implicit in my comments would, why not go around and just to the limit of what you can say it.
Could you read I don't have the duties. If you want to read them, it's like a game show, Jeff. You could read each one.
I'm going to put them on my.
Okay, that's even better.
There you go.
I was going to suggest, I think maybe with a few exceptions, we've discussed things and it seems to me at least, that we've come to a group consensus on many of them. And I don't know if Jeff, there's an efficient way for Jeff Crocker for you to summarize that and then say like any comments, dissenting, major dissenting.
I like Evan's suggestion. I think that would be
okay. All right. I think we're in
That's fine.
Duty 1 is okay. So duty 1 was develop baseline inventory. We will work on that as the agency. So we're in agreement there.
But isn't that also, Jeff, part of the reason we're recommending the registration and reporting? Because I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of incompleteness we believe, I think with some legitimacy, in the current inventory, so that it's not really possible. I mean, and tell me if you disagree, but
that's
sorry.
That's exactly right. That's what the inventory isn't going to have very many points in there. Most of them are going to be the water withdrawals for drinking water and snowmaking, which are the more well-regulated sectors using surface water resources. And then, yeah, from there, it builds on the issue of needing registration and reporting program to fill the gap. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I presumed our response to number one would be. We got this, we need this.
Yep.
Mhm. So duty 2, recommend whether or not surface water transfer between watersheds should occur. We had some discussion about this last meeting. And let me pull up my notes. I think I think Matt was going to work a little bit on this.
Right. You were going to draft something up. I think we agreed that they could occur if there was a Clean Water Act Section 401 like program in place. And then there was some, I think, I don't want to say disagreement, but I think open issues around, and especially Representative Dolan had questions about the trigger, like what constitute an interbasin transfer. But we agreed that if we had a program like a 401 program, they wouldn't be prohibited, but they need
that they would. And
a process for documenting that water quality standards would be met in both the receiving and the donating water basins.
Mm-hmm.
Donating.
Right.
I like that. But, I believe that's what we agreed, and that as the discussion evolved, that's what I was mentally agreeing with. There's no reason to ban them. Let's just make sure that they're healthy.
Yep.
That was my understanding as well. And there was Jordan and I can circle back with Matt on his thoughts. I think he had a thought of where that could be in statute, but okay. And with the outstanding question of what was the basin size, I think Puck 6 was thrown out there, but there were some other opinions that we can maybe flesh out in the report. Okay, 3, identify whether state of Vermont should develop and implement a statewide permitting or regulatory regime for diversions or other transfers of surface water, including the scale or size of the watershed, how the permitting program will comply with Vermont water quality standards, how or if the permitting program should address the impact of a diversion on groundwater, and how to reduce the demand through water recycling use and efficiency measures. We had much of conversation today on the proposal. It seemed mostly positive. So I think there's some details that need to be worked out, and some stuff that the agency needs to discuss around the proposal that Jordan and I will meet on.
And the only thing that I wanted to make sure that there's a clear one-word answer to is C, is a permitting program for surface water diversion, address the impacts of diversion on groundwater. No. That, we've got a program in place, and there's no reason to try and mix the two of them, albeit they are mixed.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, David. And, I think that it's, there's an expression for this and I've forgotten what it is, but, either it's a surface water withdrawal or a groundwater withdrawal. And clearly there are situations where, the groundwater contributes to the surface water contributes to the groundwater. But those are minor from my experience. And, it's really, if you're taking, 50,000 gallons a day out of a stream, that's a surface water withdrawal. And if you're drawing 50,000 gallons of water out of a well, that's a groundwater withdrawal. And I think I wish I could remember that's saying. If it smells like something, it is. But anyway. So,
It walks like
Walks
a
like a
duck,
duck.
yeah, barks like a duck.
Yeah.
It's a duck.
yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
I agree with Jeff and David, and I would add that I think it's important to, like, when we answer these questions for the legislature, and Representative Dolan could speak to, because she's on the committee, but I think the committee just wanted to make sure that impacts on both groundwater and surface water were being addressed. And I think I agree with what I think Jeff is saying is, not only is it primarily a groundwater or surface water withdrawal, but to get a groundwater withdrawal permit, you have to address impacts on surface water. So there's already a linkage in that law. And but this closes the gap in that there's no review systematically of pure withdrawals from surface water. So, but yeah, we could do, I think how we write this is important to explain to the committee.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just wondering sort of what the expectation of our study group, or what the expectation of the outcome from our study group was under this number 3. We've heard from other states what they're doing. We've kind of digested that. We've some of that maybe informed what's in these recommendations that Jeff Crocker's put out. But there's also just a lot of detail in here about how this program would be structured, and I kind of feel like we're punting on it a little bit, right? We're saying, hey, we need more data, and then after that, we'll take time, or the state will take time to digest that data and make sense of it, and then implement a regulatory program. But I just wasn't sure, since this is my first time on one of these study committees, is this something, Jeff Crocker, that you'll address in the report, that we'll comment on, and some of these details that are listed in here, like the scale or size of the watershed subject to regulation, or some of the, like, one of the things that really stands out in my mind from the New Hampshire regulatory approach was the scaling of the withdrawal relative to the flow, which I think is really interesting, from the technical details of that. And Ryan Patch was making a number of comments related to that today that I think are really important. So yeah, I'm just wondering, like, to what degree we're gonna weigh in on that.
So yeah, the way I envision this is the agency will be doing a lot of the drafting for these duties and sharing it with the committee for comments. And the idea would be that we could get the committee hopefully all on the same page and submit one report where we're in agreement on the approach as a whole. So I'll draft some stuff on the scale and watershed regulations that we were thinking, and let you as a hydrologist on the committee comment on your thoughts on it and what New Hampshire does, and maybe there's things that we want to incorporate.
So just in my view, like, so as a lawyer and not as a technical person, like, the way I look at, and this is one of the things we were trying to accomplish in putting together what we sent to the committee and that we talked about today, is based on the testimony that we heard from the academics and the other states, and the other work we've done on the committee. I think the answer to A is we need to gather the data to basically know how to shape the trigger for Vermont. Within that, we could say some possibilities are, this and that and the other thing, but I think what I'm hoping is that, we could agree that we need that's the part of it that I think we really need the data for, is the trigger more than anything else. Like, how are we going, what's going to trigger jurisdiction? When is a permit going to be required?
Yep.
So I think that's a main answer. And then,
Mm-hmm.
like I said, we could fill it in with like what testimony we heard and what the different approaches
Yeah.
were. Does that make sense?
I think so.
That sounds good to me. Yeah,
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Then are we on 4? Is that where we're at?
Yeah.
Analyze the potential viable regimes to address the use of surface water in Vermont.
It's sort of the same thing in my mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it is. I think I think it's answered by the interest in number 3.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then, 5, I think, is largely a legislative handoff of whatever we come to agreement with for drafting, changing existing, adding existing authority.
Yeah, I mean, 5 is the green books and 6 is the agency rules.
Yeah, and I guess as far as 6 goes, it strikes me there's probably 2 work products here. One is the procedure that you're going to develop, or that you would develop for the registration and reporting, and then the second would be which I think would be a rule for the permitting.
Yep.
Yep.
So we've done a pretty good job.
I was
Yeah,
just going to say, it seems like
I think so.
good. Let's pat ourselves on the back.
Yeah, I think the next thing obviously is for Jordan and I to start drafting and getting the committee some drafts to look at with the detail in it, and starting to flesh out some of the finer details here on these points.
Okay, so just to be clear, and I'm sort of asking John, we don't have a drafting responsibility at this point, right? It's
I was
just,
wondering, I was listening carefully for that myself, David.
yeah.
I'm happy to
I think. What was that, John? I'm happy to
I'm happy to
delegate
work
to
with, if Jordan would like to, I'm
Jordan.
happy to work with Jordan, and because she's transitioning on, and
Yeah.
but I think it could be one. I mean, come all from the agency, and everyone gets to comment on it. And if it's a shared document, edit it, and all together. But Jordan, if you want, I'm happy. If you want to just take the ball and run with it, go ahead.
Jordan had to
She's
sign off.
She's
that
gone.
agree.
All right. Well, you
Yeah.
asked Jordan.
And
Once.
I will.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she was just assigned to this, so we have not met to discuss. So we have a little work on internally.
And since
to do.
she's left the meeting, let's give her the
Yeah.
drafting
Kind
responsibility.
of the town meeting rule is that you're not there,
Right.
you get the assignment. So
Yeah.
Okay. So in reviewing these drafts, or maybe we should put a date on there on the
Yes.
calendar for us to the agency to get you some material to look at here. And to think probably get the committee some drafts on sections the week of October 18th.
Interestingly enough, my book was turned to that day.
Yeah. So, and then, so we would pass it around for comments, the sections. Do we want to put a time to meet as well as a committee to discuss while we have everyone here?
I think we should.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you want to do, like, we'll have them for 1 week, and then is that enough time? And then we like look for October 25th for a meeting. Just kind of knowing that I'd probably have to take whatever you guys get, and we'll have to redrafts and, you know, discussions and trying to fit it in all in a month and a
Right.
half.
And should there be disagreement between members of the committee, what I would suggest, as opposed to you playing Solomon, that you list the disagreements and the committee can discuss, debate, and decide.
Okay. I think that makes sense. So does the 25th of October work?
I am unavailable that Monday and Tuesday, unfortunately. Is it possible that we could do a non-Monday meeting, like Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday that week, or?
I could do Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. Does that work for others? So the week would be the 27th, 28th, or 29th of October.
Yeah, the morning of the 28th, I couldn't,
Okay.
but otherwise, fine.
I could do the afternoon of the 27th or the 28th.
The afternoon of the 27th is my only availability in October.
Okay. So afternoon of the
27th to the 28th.
All
Yeah,
right,
that's fine.
we can do the afternoon. All right, I can send that out afternoon, the 27th, at 1 to 4 again, time frame.
Yeah.
That works.
Right. All right. And we'll maybe try again in person. Let's hope things are a little better.
Be up to Zeta variant by then.
Yeah.
Please don't say that.
Don't say that. Please don't
Yeah,
say
please.
that. Yeah.
I'm COVID
I
out.
know. Bad joke, sorry. Yeah, no, it'd be great if we could, but obviously we have to do what's safe and
Yeah.
prudent. So
I will.
yeah.
I will plan for in person with a hybrid option again, and we'll see what we can do.
Okay. And, I guess sort of echoing what John was saying, I mean, if there was any need for Jordan to converse, with any of us, I mean, I'm happy to speak with her or anyone in terms of our experience with the snowmaking rules over the years, and, just share that, that with folks if that's helpful offline before we get there. So just, reach out. I'm happy to,
Yeah.
provide any input I can.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for the offer. Yeah. I will let her know that as she gets up to speed on all this stuff.
Okay.
As we move forward. Yeah. Thank you. Anything else?
I'm good.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for facilitating another good meeting. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you
Thanks, sir.
for all pivoting to a virtual format again.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
I'll send out these invites and we'll be in touch. Okay.
Take care.
Thank you all.
Bye all.
Good to see you all.